A wide shot of a city built like a coral reef carved from glass. Spires of pale violet, lavender sky, two pale moons hanging at noon. Pull in, down through the rooftops, past the crystal lamps, toward a garden the color of crushed amethyst. A woman walks alone through the garden, floor-length silver, gloves to the wrist, 10 meters of empty path on every side. Her guards keep their distance. They keep it on purpose. She pauses at a white flower. She pulls off one glove. She touches a single petal. The flower hisses. It blackens. It crumbles to ash on the moss. Clothes on her face. No tears. Just the look of a woman who has done this before. Then the air cracks. A shimmer in the trellis behind her. A weapon she did not expect. A shadow already running across the moss toward her at full sprint. Boots tear the violet ground. She turns, and a man she does not yet know reaches out a bare hand. Part 1. The air smelled like ozone and burning silk. Rowan held her against his chest. Tight. So tight her wrists were trapped between them. Plasma fire cut the air above their heads in long white ribbons. Stone exploded behind him. Dust filled his mouth. She was screaming at him to let go. She was screaming because her skin was glowing, because the magenta veins under her sapphire jaw were pulsing white, because every nerve in him should already be dead. And he wasn't. He just held her tighter, his teeth locked. His scarred hand cupped the back of her head. Her hair the color of deep ocean tangled around his knuckles. The current poured through him. He shook. He did not let go. Her glowing cyan eyes met his, wide, terrified. Not for herself, for him. She whispered something he could not hear over the gunfire. Something that broke in her throat. Cut to black. A woman's voice, soft and tired like the last hour before sleep. They said no man could survive my touch. Beat. He held me anyway. 3 weeks earlier, the shuttle dropped Rowan Mercer onto a landing pad of polished obsidian. The dockmaster was a tall, willowy Irida who would not look him in the eye. The dockmaster's hands trembled when he stamped the contract. Rowan understood. The Iridi did not like humans. The Iridi liked humans even less when humans came armed. Rowan came armed. He shouldered his pack. The strap dug into the muscle at the base of his neck. He liked the weight there. It reminded him he was still upright, still walking, still useful. Inside the pack, wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom, was a photograph. He had not opened it in 4 years. He did not open it now. The capital of Aurelia Prime spread out beneath the landing platform like a coral reef carved from glass. Spires of pale violet, causeways glowing soft gold. The sky was lavender. 2 pale moons hung at noon. Birds the size of horses drifted on warm thermals, their feathers iridescent and slow. Pretty, Rowan thought. He did not trust Pretty. Pretty was where the bleeding usually started. A handler met him at the gate. She was an ruddy female 6.5 feet of polite hostility. Her name tag read Vesa. She handed him a sealed envelope and a perimeter map. Outer ring, she said. Garden detail, day shift. That's it. That is what the contract pays for mercenary. He almost smiled. He did not. Smiling at Iridi made them flinch. He had learned that on the shuttle. Where do I sleep? Barracks B. Other humans are in Barracks B. How many other humans? She blinked at him like the question was strange. You. I'm the other humans. You are the only human. So, he shouldered his pack again and walked. The barracks was a stone cube with a cot and a sink and a window facing the wrong direction. He sat on the cot. He listened to the building. Iridi architecture sang. Something about the resonance of crystal in the walls. A low humming, like a refrigerator. Or a tuning fork. The sound got inside his molars and stayed there. He took off his boots. He set them by the door toes, pointing out, "Old habit, drop shock habit. If you have to leave fast, your boots are already aimed at the exit." He did not unpack the photograph. He did unpack his rifle. He stripped it. He cleaned it. He rebuilt it. He set it across his knees. Then he sat in the dark and listened to a planet hum, and he thought about his daughter because he could not help it, because the quiet always made him think about her. Junie was 12 now. She had been 8 when he walked out the door. 4 years was a long time to not see a child grow. 4 years was the kind of time a man fills with contracts, with hostile planets, with work that might kill him so he does not have to decide on purpose to stop. Because the alternative was a small house in a small town where he would have to sit at a kitchen table and explain to the girl in the photograph why he had left her. He could not explain it, so he did not go home. He went here. He fell asleep with his back against the wall and the rifle across his knees. In the morning, he met the Empress. The garden was called the Sapphire Court. Rowan stood at his post for an hour before he understood the name. The moss underfoot was violet. The trees were silver. The fountains ran with a thin liquid that caught the lavender light and broke it into prisms. And in the center of it all, behind a wall of armored crystal, was a circle of jade flowers. Nobody walked in the circle. Not the gardeners, not the guards, not the courtiers who came to take their morning tea on the terrace. The other guards were Iridi. They moved like they were embarrassed to have bodies. Their captain's name was Drevin. Drevin kept Rowan at the back of the formation the way you keep a dog you are not sure of between yourself and the door. Her radiance approaches. The voice was thin. The guards stiffened. Rowan did not stiffen. He breathed out. Loose knees, loose hands. The old drop shock rule. You do not lock anything before the moment of impact. The blast doors at the far end of the garden slid open without a sound. She stepped into the light. And Rowan forgot for half a second what he was supposed to be doing. It was not because she was beautiful. He had seen beautiful women before. He had been married to one. Beautiful was not what made him stop breathing. It was the way she walked. She walked like the air around her was a cage. She walked like every step was a calculation. She walked like a woman who had been told every day of her life that her body was a weapon and who had finally come to believe it. Her hands were clasped low in front of her fingers tucked away. Her skin was the color of deep ocean. Sapphire so dark it was almost ink. At her temples, branching veins of magenta light pulsed slow and rhythmic. Bioluminescent. A warning the way a dart frog is a warning. Do not touch. Her gown was floor-length silver. The sleeves covered her arms to the wrist. The collar climbed to her jaw. She wore gloves. Even with all of that, the Iridi guard stood 10 meters out, terrified. Rowan watched her cross the path. He watched her pause at the circle of jade flowers. He watched her sigh soft as falling snow. She reached out. Her gloved hand hovered above a bloom. Then she pulled the glove off. He almost called out. He didn't. She touched the flower. It was the lightest touch. A fingertip, no more. The flower hissed, it blackened, it crumbled into a small pile of ash on the moss. She stood there for a long moment looking at her own hand. She put the glove back on. She turned away, and Rowan, who had not felt anything in particular for 4 years, felt something move in his chest. Small, quiet, like a door he had nailed shut, creaking open 1 millimeter. He looked at the ash on the moss. He looked at the Empress walking alone among her own gardens, 10 meters from her own guards. He thought, you poor lonely thing. Then he caught himself thinking it, and he was annoyed. He was not here for that. He was here for the contract. He was here to be far away. The first day passed without incident. The second day passed without incident. On the third day, somebody tried to kill her. It was the 18th minute of the second hour of the afternoon shift. Rowan would remember the time later because he was a man who remembered times. The garden was warm. The sky was the soft, pale violet of pre-storm. The Irity guards were bored. Captain Drevin was discussing dinner with his second. Rowan's eye caught the shimmer first. It was small, a distortion in the air near the trellis of climbing vines. The kind of distortion thermal camouflage makes when sunlight hits it from the wrong angle. No Iridi sensor would catch it. The predators on Iridi did not use thermal cloaks. The predators on Earth did. Rowan had spent 6 years in jungle warfare on 3 different worlds. He had been trained specifically by men who had been trained specifically to spot exactly that. He spoke into his comm. Low, calm. Contact, left flank, 80 meters. Drevin turned. What thermal cloak? There is no... The air cracked. A kinetic round designed to punch through tank plating tore through the space where the Empress had been standing a fraction of a second before. She had frozen. Her body had read the change in the air. The round shattered the stone paver at her feet and threw chips of granite into the fountain. Ambush! Drevin screamed. 3 more shimmers dropped their cloaks. Heavy armor, pulse rifles. They were positioned in a triangle around her. Professional. The Iridi guards raised their shields. The shields were beautiful. The shields were also too far away. The guards were 10 meters out because protocol kept them there, because the Empress's skin was lethal at close range, and to save her, they would have to touch her, and to touch her was to die. Rowan watched them hesitate. He watched a man in dress uniform calculate in real time his own survival against his own oath. He watched the man choose his survival. Rowan did not consider it. He moved. His boots tore up the violet moss. He hit top speed in 3 strides. He was 110 kilos of armor and bone, and bad decisions crossing 40 meters at the speed of a freight truck, and his only thought was that he was already too late. The Empress had raised her hands. Her markings were flaring white. She was preparing to discharge. It would not matter. The assassins were 80 meters out. Her field would not reach them. She would die with the markings on her temples blazing like a road flare, and her hands stretched out in a useless gesture of self-defense. "Human!" Drevin screamed in his ear. "Stop, you will incinerate!" Rowan did not stop. He saw her glowing eyes track him. Widen. Not at the gunman. At him. At the human running full sprint into a field that should have ended him at 3 meters. He saw the assassin's finger tighten on the trigger. He hit her like a truck. He wrapped both arms around her waist. He twisted his body in midair so he would land first. He drove her down into the soft moss just as the air where she had been standing went white with superheated plasma. They hit the ground hard. He took the impact on his back. He cradled her against his chest. Stone chips rained down around them. And then her skin touched his neck. The world went white. There was a sound like a transformer exploding inside his skull. There was a smell of ionized air and burning leather. His HUD blew out. His teeth chattered so hard he thought they would crack, and his jaw locked and his vision went to static. He felt her hands flat against his throat. The deadliest point of contact. The magenta light poured into him. It was searching for his heart. It was searching for the synaptic chain that ran his lungs. It was searching for everything that made him a working organism, and it was trying to switch all of it off. His heart stuttered. His heart kept beating. His nerves screamed and held. "Let go," she sobbed. Her voice was thin, wrecked. "Release me. You will die. You will die. You will die, please." He did not let go. He rolled them. He put his armored back between her and the next round of plasma fire. He dragged her into the cover of the stone fountain. He pressed his cheek against her temple. His teeth were clenched so hard he could taste copper. "Stay down," he rasped. She stopped struggling. She stared at him. She was waiting for him to die. He could see it in her face. She was bracing for the slump, for the dead weight, for the moment his body would go heavy on top of her. She had seen it before. She had seen it many times. She was waiting for the corpse. Above them, the Iridi guards finally moved. The royal honor blade caught the first assassin through the chest. The second was cut down by a particle lance that opened him from shoulder to hip. The third tried to retreat. The third did not retreat fast enough. The garden filled with the brief, ugly sounds of professional violence ending, with somebody choking on his own blood, with somebody else apologizing to no one in particular. Then it was quiet. Rowan lay on top of the Empress of the Iridi, his cheek against her temple, smoke rising from his collar. She was still waiting for the corpse. He coughed. The cough hurt. Everything hurt. His arms were shaking. The skin on his neck felt sunburn. His left ear was ringing in a high, thin frequency. He wheezed, target suppressed. She did not breathe for a second. Then she did. A short, sharp inhale. The kind of breath you take when you have surfaced from something dark. He felt her chest rise against his. He felt every Iridi guard in the garden lower their weapon at the same time. He felt the sky go silent. He sat up, slow. His muscles twitched. The residual current was still rolling in pulses across his shoulders and down his forearms. He looked at his hands. The skin from his wrist to his elbows was an angry pink, the color of a bad sunburn. The skin was not split. There was no blackening. There was no dead tissue. He flexed his fingers. They worked. He looked down at her. She had not moved. Her hair, the color of midnight water, fanned out across the violet moss. Her gown was torn at one shoulder. The markings on her temples had dimmed to a soft, frightened pink. Her hands were still pressed flat against his throat. She felt the warmth of his pulse under her thumb. She started to cry. Not with sound, not even with breath. Just a single thin line of light running from the corner of her eye down to her temple. Iridi tears were a kind of pale blue. They glowed faintly. They were rare. The Iridi believed an empress did not weep. This empress wept. "You are alive," she whispered. "Yeah, you are alive." Working on it. She let out a small broken sound. It was almost a laugh. Then she remembered abruptly who she was and what he was and where they were, and she scrambled backward across the moss until her back hit the rim of the fountain. She pulled her hands inside her sleeves like a child caught reaching for something she had been told never to touch. "Medics," she ordered. Her voice cracked. "Get him to quarantine, now." "Don't need quarantine," Rowan said. His voice came out gravel. "Need an aspirin." "Silence." Her eyes were wet and very bright. "You do not speak. You will conserve your energy." He looked at her. She was sitting in the dirt in a torn ceremonial gown surrounded by dead assassins, telling him with all the imperial authority her shaking voice could carry to shut up and lie still. She was extraordinary. He shut up. He lay back against the stone fountain. He let the medics in their hazmat suits scoop him up onto a hover stretcher. He let them strap his arms down. As they carried him out, he turned his head. She was still sitting by the fountain. She was not looking at the dead assassins. She was not looking at her frightened guards. She was looking at the patch of crushed moss where they had landed. Her hands had come back out of her sleeves. She was turning them over in front of her face slow like she had never seen them before. She touched her own shoulder, the exact spot where his hand had gripped her. She pressed her fingers into the skin as if she could find the imprint of him there. The doors closed. The medical wing was clean to the point of cruelty. White walls, white light, a brightness that does not let a tired man close his eyes. They scanned him. They drew his blood. The blood came out dark red and thick and full of iron, and the Iridi technicians stared at it the way you might stare at a small carnivore that had crawled out from under a sink. They scanned him again. They did not believe the first scan. They did not believe the second scan either. By the third hour, they ran out of scans. By the fourth hour, they ran out of reasons to keep him strapped down. By the fifth hour, he was sitting on the edge of a biobed in medical scrubs that were too tight across the shoulders, eating a nutrient bar he had smuggled in the cuff of his boot. The medics had taken his armor. The medics had not thought to check his boot. The door hissed open. The medics scrambled to bow. Salira Vale, Empress of the Iridi, swept into the room. She had changed. The torn gown was gone. She wore a robe of dark silver silk that covered her from collarbone to floor. She had pulled her hair back into a long, simple braid. She had put the gloves back on. She looked smaller this way. Or maybe she looked the same and the room around her had simply gotten too large. "Leave us," she said. The senior medic stepped forward. "Your radiance, the subject is, leave us." They left. The door sealed behind them with a soft click. She did not come closer. She stood at the foot of the bed 10 paces away. She held her gloved hands clasped low in front of her. The pose was the same one she had used in the garden when she walked alone. He watched her watch him. He let her. When she finally spoke, her voice was very small. "Why aren't you dead?" He took another bite of the nutrient bar. He chewed. He swallowed. Humans are built different. "I have seen a crawl warrior turn to dust because he brushed my arm during a ceremony." "Yeah, I have seen the strongest predator on this planet stop breathing because I petted it." "Yeah, my skin is absolute. There is no resistance." "Not absolute." He held up his arm. The pink had already faded to a duller pink. He flexed his fingers in front of her. He watched her eyes track the movement. "Just spicy," he said. She blinked. "Spicy." It hurt, like grabbing a live wire, but my nerves are insulated different. We grew up on a heavy planet, high solar, thick skin, slow conduction. Whatever your skin does, it doesn't recognize my hardware. We're not compatible software. "Not compatible," she repeated. "No." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You felt pain." "Yeah." "You did not let go. You were being shot at." She closed her eyes. He watched the breath go out of her. Slow. Long. Like a balloon someone had been holding for a year and finally allowed to deflate. When she opened her eyes again, she was a different woman. The Empress was still there in the set of her shoulders, in the perfect stillness of her hands. But underneath the Empress, for the first time, he could see a person. Younger than he had thought. Tired in a way that was not about sleep. Watching him the way a starving person watches food, with both hunger and shame. She took one step toward him, then another. She stopped 3 meters out. Protocol distance. "Why aren't you afraid?" He thought about it. "Because you're crying." She stiffened. Her hand went to her cheek. The tear had dried hours ago. There was no evidence on her face. "I am not." "You were." "I am the Empress. I do not cry." "Okay." "I do not." "Okay." She stared at him. He stared back. It was a very quiet 30 seconds. Then without warning, she sat down. Not on the chair against the wall. On the floor. Right there 3 meters from his bio-bed on the cold, sterile tile. She arranged her robe around her knees with the unconscious grace of a woman who had been trained from age 4 how to fold silk while sitting. The Empress of the Iridi sat on the floor of a medical bay and looked up at a human mercenary and did not say a word. Rowan looked down at her. His arm was still pink. His ear was still ringing. He had a nutrient bar in one hand and a question in the back of his throat. He did not ask the question. He just sat there with her. Because she was a woman who had not been in the same room as another person without a wall of protocol between them for 21 years. Because she did not seem to know how to leave. Because every time her gaze slid up to his face, she looked like she was checking again that he was real. Because somebody somewhere had decided this woman was going to be alone, and somebody had been wrong. After a long time, she said, "What is your name?" "Mercer." "Your given name?" "Rowan." She tested it. "Rowan." It was the first time anyone in his life had said his name the way she said it, like she was holding it in her mouth to make sure it would not break. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. She stood up. The grace came back to her. The Empress assembled herself around the girl the way a coat goes back on after a moment by the fire. "You will not speak of this," she said. "To anyone." "Of what?" "Of this." He understood her. "No, ma'am." "Celira." He blinked. Ma'am, in this room, when the door is closed, you will call me Salira. Salira. Yes. She turned to go. At the door, she paused. Her gloved hand rested on the frame. She did not look back at him. Rowan. Yes. Thank you. She left. He sat on the bio bed for another long minute listening to the room hum. He looked at his pink arm. He looked at the door. He looked at the half-eaten nutrient bar in his hand. He set the bar down. He did not have the appetite. The summons came 2 days later. A page in pale green livery delivered it on a folded piece of paper that smelled faintly of crushed lavender. The Empress, the page set his eyes very carefully on the floor, requested the human's presence in her private receiving chamber. The page did not say what kind of presence. The page also did not stay long enough to be asked. Rowan dressed. His armor had been cleaned. The leather had been reoiled. Someone had even replaced the strap at his collar where her hand had burned through it. The replacement strap was perfect. The Iridi were thorough. He walked. The palace was a labyrinth designed by an architect who had never been in a hurry. Long corridors of pale stone, vaulted ceilings hung with chains of crystal lamps, tapestries showing the history of the imperial line, the colors so faded they had become suggestions. He passed nobles in the halls. They stopped talking when he passed. They picked up their conversations again the moment he turned a corner. He had been the subject of 1,000 conversations, all of them in a language he did not entirely speak. He found the chamber. The chamber was vast and dim and cool. A single wall of glass overlooked the city. Salira stood at that wall, her back to him, watching the spires of Aurelia Prime catch the late light. She was not wearing gloves. "Officer Mercer, your radiance." "Closer." He walked forward. He stopped at 3 meters. Protocol distance. "Closer." He took another step, then another. He stopped at 1 meter from her back. He could smell her now. Not ozone, not the burn air smell of her field. Something earthier, like rain on hot stone, like the smell of a garden after a long summer storm. She turned. She lifted her hands, slow. She was telegraphing the motion. She did not want him to flinch. "I need to know," she said. Her voice was soft, steady until it wasn't. "I need to be sure it was not a fluke." Her index finger hovered an inch from his face. She was trembling. He understood. She was not afraid of him. She was afraid the universe was going to correct its mistake. She was afraid that this time finally her body would do what it had always been told it would do, and the one person in 21 years she had been able to look in the eye would slump to the floor. He did not move. He leaned half an inch into her hand. Her fingertip brushed his cheekbone. A small blue spark snapped between them. Audible. Sharp. His jaw muscle jumped. He did not pull away. She gasped. She yanked her hand back like she had been burned, but she stared at his cheek. Stared. A tiny red mark already fading. "You are warm," she whispered. "Mammal, you are so warm. We run hot. 37 Celsius. Walking radiators." She looked at her own hand. She turned it over. She looked at him again. A slow smile spread across her face. Not the small, careful smile of a court empress. A real smile. Wide. Startled. Like a child discovering that the dog she had been told would bite had instead licked her hand. "It barely hurt you," she said. "Felt it. Less than the assassins." "Less than the assassins." She laughed. It came out as one short surprise sound. She covered her mouth with both hands the moment it escaped, as if she had not been certified to make that noise in a long time. "The council says I am cursed," she said. Her voice changed when she said council. It went hard. "They say my touch is a divine judgment. They say I must remain pure and isolated to protect my people. The council sounds like a bunch of superstitious old men." She inhaled, sharp. He had said the wrong thing. He had said exactly the right thing. She laughed again, a real laugh this time. It was very short. It was very bright. No one speaks of the council that way. I do. Yes. She studied him. You do. She circled him. Slow. Like a cat that had decided he was probably safe and was double-checking. She stopped behind his shoulder. He felt the small, warm hum of her presence at the back of his neck, that low electrical buzz that her skin produced without her noticing. She did not touch him. She did not have to. I am promoting you, she said. He turned his head. Ma'am, you are no longer perimeter security. What am I? My shadow. He went still. The Irity word she used was older than the Empire. He knew enough imperial linguistics to understand it. A shadow was not a guard. A shadow was a single-name protector who walked at the Empress's left elbow. A shadow stood at her door while she slept. A shadow was permitted in the inner sanctum, the council chamber, the bath, the bedchamber. A shadow was the only person an empress could not by law send away. There had not been a shadow in 9 generations. The last one had been blind because blindness was the only thing that allowed a man to walk close to an empress without dying of looking at her. He was not blind. That's going to upset some important people, he said. It is. They will try to remove me. Let them try. She came around to face him again. Her glowing cyan eyes met his. If they touch me, they die. Her chin lifted. You survive. He looked at her for a long moment. He saw it then, the loneliness in her face. So old and deep it had become a feature the way a riverbed becomes a feature of a valley. He saw the desperation of a woman who had been starving for contact her whole adult life and had finally by accident found one source. He should have refused. He thought very clearly that he should have refused. He thought of his daughter. He thought of Junie 12 on a small green planet learning fractions and forgetting his face. He thought of the photograph at the bottom of his pack that he had not opened in 4 years. He thought, what am I doing here? What he said was, I'm not going anywhere, Salira. She smiled. Her markings, the magenta veins on her temples flared, not with warning, with something warmer, something the color of a candle. Good, she said. Take off your glove. He hesitated. He unstrapped the leather gauntlet on his right hand. He pulled it off. He set it on the small table beside her. He held the hand up, scarred, calloused, the knuckles bent slightly wrong from an old fracture that had set crooked. She reached out. She took his hand. The static crackled light and sharp like a small log catching fire. She didn't flinch. She closed her cool blue fingers around his rough ones. His hand swallowed hers. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 21 years. Warm, she said. She closed her eyes. She stood there in front of a wall of evening light holding a stranger's hand, and the Empress of the Irity looked for one perfect quiet moment, like a woman who had finally come in out of the cold. He did not let go. The first night, her chambers were enormous and freezing. The Irity preferred cool air. Salira's bedchamber was kept just above the freezing point of water. He understood why. The lower the ambient temperature, the slower her field discharged. They kept her room cold to keep her safe. They kept her safe by keeping her uncomfortable. He stood at the foot of her circular bed. The bed was the size of his old apartment. The blankets were a deep sea blue. She pointed to the floor. You will sleep there. Yes, ma'am. Closer than any guard has ever been allowed. Yes, ma'am. He set down his rifle. He sat down on the cold stone where she had pointed. He leaned his back against the wall. His breath fogged in front of him. She watched him. She turned out the lamps. For a long time, the only sound was the deep, mechanical hum of the palace and the soft whisper of silk as she moved restlessly under her blankets. Around 3 in the morning by his chrono, she sat up. He was awake before she finished the motion. Status, I am cold. He understood without being told. The thermal regulators were not malfunctioning. The council had turned them down. He could feel the dip in the air, 2 degrees colder than when he had come in. He stood up. He walked to the side of the bed. He kept his boots on. He kept his armor on. He kept his back to her. He sat on the edge of the mattress the way you sit on the edge of a chair you do not own. He was a heat source, nothing more. He felt the mattress dip behind him as she curled into the small space between his back and the headboard. She did not touch him. She did not have to. The blankets trapped his radiated warmth in the small bubble of air between them. The shivering stopped within a minute. Better? Yes. Good. A pause, then very quiet. Rowan. Yeah. The clasp on my necklace. He turned his head. She had swept her hair aside. The platinum choker glinted at the nape of her neck. The clasp was small and intricate, Irity work, designed for a drone to remove. The drone was malfunctioning, she had said earlier. He suspected the drone was not malfunctioning. He suspected the council had broken it. She did not look at him. She just held her hair to one side and waited. He understood what she was asking. He understood the test of it. He understood the trust of it. He took off his gloves. His hands were large, scarred, calloused from rifle stocks and rope and the small hot machinery of a long life of dirty work. His fingers were the kind of fingers that broke things. They had never been the kind of fingers that handled royalty. He reached out. The moment his fingertip brushed the smooth skin at the back of her neck, the static popped. A sharp, small hiss. The hair at the nape of her neck lifted. He felt the current run up his thumb and into his wrist. It stung. It was not lethal. It was not even close to lethal. It was the kind of jolt you get from a wool sweater on a dry winter morning. He held steady. He felt her tense, not pulling away, bracing. Steady, he murmured. His fingers found the latch. The clasp was small. He worked it. The mechanism gave. The necklace clicked open. He drew the metal away from her throat. His thumb grazed the soft skin over the bump of her spine. A shiver ran through her. Not pain, not fear. Something else. A long sound came out of her low in her throat between a sigh and a sob. He held the necklace in his hand. He looked at the back of her bare neck, at the dark sapphire skin, at the soft pulse he could see under it, at the place where 1,000 years of imperial protocol said no one was allowed to be. He set the necklace on the bedside table. "Thank you," she whispered. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He did not let her hear it. "Go to sleep, Celira." She did not correct the use of her name. She turned slowly in the dark. She curled toward his back, not against him, just toward him, close enough that the warmth of his armor reached her through the silk, close enough that he could hear her breathing. She fell asleep within 5 minutes. Empresses, it turned out, were just people who had not been allowed to be tired for a very long time. Rowan sat on the edge of her bed in full armor, his back to her, his rifle on the floor where he could reach it in one motion, and he watched the door. He did not sleep that night. He thought about a photograph at the bottom of his pack. He thought about a girl named Junie who used to climb into his lap at 3 in the morning because she had had a bad dream. He thought about how long it had been since anyone had needed him for anything other than violence. He thought, what am I doing? He thought, I am not leaving. Outside the door in the long stone corridor, a tall, thin shadow stopped on its way to the council chambers. Theron Drax, High Counselor of the Irity, paused outside the Empress's door. He stood very still for a long time listening. He heard nothing. That was wrong. He had been listening at this door for 21 years. He knew the sounds of an empty room. He knew the sound of a woman crying alone. He knew the sound of a woman not crying alone. There was a second person breathing inside that room. There was a second person, and the second person was alive. Theron Drax stood in the corridor and stared at the door, and his gloved hand curled slow into a fist. He turned. He walked very quietly toward the council chambers. He had work to do. Part 2. The morning after, Celira would not look at him. She was already up when he opened his eyes. She was at the window, hair braided, robe fastened to the throat. The gloves were back on. He sat up, slow. His back ached from sleeping against the headboard. He cleared his throat. Celira. Empress. He paused. Empress. She nodded once. She did not turn. He understood. The night had been a small private country. The morning was an empire. There were rules. She had to wear the rules. She had to wear them in front of staff, in front of council, in front of the windows that the council surely watched. He stood. He buckled his sidearm. He took his post by the door. She walked past him at a measured pace. She did not look at his face. Her hand brushed his. It was the lightest touch. A gloved fingertip 3 inches above the wrist. 2 seconds, no more. She did not slow down. She did not look back. But the touch had said, I know what last night was. I will not forget. We will speak of it again when there are no windows. He stayed at parade rest with his hand burning. The week that followed was a slow press. The council did not move openly. The council never moved openly. The council moved through paperwork. They moved through delays. They moved through the small administrative cruelties of a body that had been running a planet for 10,000 years and knew exactly how to suffocate a new fact without leaving a mark. Rowan's security clearances were lost, then found, then lost again. His meal credits stopped working in the officer's mess. His armor was sent for cleaning and came back 3 days late with one strap mysteriously frayed in a way that suggested a knife. Twice he found his quarters unlocked. Once he found a small black insect on his pillow. The insect had not been alive when it was placed there. The insect had been chosen specifically because Iridy mythology said it carried the souls of the unfaithful to the third hell. Rowan flushed it down the sanitizer. He did not mention any of this to Celira. He did not need to. She had been raised inside this machine. She knew its sounds. She did not apologize for them. What she did was different. She started talking to him. Not in the corridors, not in council chambers, not where any frequency might catch them. But at the end of the long day, after the gloves came off, after the door was sealed, after the lamps went down to a low, warm gold, she talked. She told him she had been 7 when her mother died. She told him she did not remember her mother's face, only a warm hand on her hair. A voice singing low in a language Celira now knew was the old imperial tongue. A smell. Something like crushed mint in cold stone. She told him she had been told her mother had succumbed to a fever, a rare strain, contracted from a foreign delegation. She had been told the delegation had been quietly punished. She had been told this was the reason no foreign delegation was now permitted within the palace walls without quarantine. She told him she had been told this by Theron Drax. She said the name the way you say the name of a man who has been your only relative for 21 years. With something close to love, with something closer to fear. She told him the markings had begun the night after the funeral. She told him the first death had been her nursemaid. She did not remember the woman's name. She said the council had told her she had killed the nursemaid by reaching for her hand. She said she had been 7. She said she had not been allowed to attend the woman's burial because the council had said gently the woman's family might not survive the sight of her. Rowan listened. He did not interrupt. He did not, when she finished, offer comfort. Comfort, he had learned, was not what she wanted. Comfort was a thing strangers gave you when they wanted to feel useful. What she wanted was a witness, so he was a witness. He sat across from her 3 meters out, with his elbows on his knees, and he let her talk until the words ran out. When the words ran out, she looked at him. Rowan. Yes. Do you think I killed her? He did not pause. No. You did not even think. I did not have to. Why? Because 7-year-olds don't kill the people who tuck them in. Because somebody told you a story and somebody benefited from the story. She did not breathe for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, I have never heard anyone say that out loud. You should hear it more. She closed her eyes. The lamp on the wall flickered. The shadows moved across the dark sapphire of her cheek. She said, "On the seventh day from now, there will be a public sacrament." What's a sacrament? A ritual. The empress drinks from the council chalice in front of the assembled nobility. It is a renewal of the divine compact. It is a reminder of who I am and who they are. What does it taste like? She opened her eyes. She looked at him. It tastes like nectar, then bitter at the back of the throat. The bitterness is the holy part. He went still. Bitter how? Almonds almost. They say it is the breath of the first ancestor. He did not answer for a moment. Then he said, Celira. Yes. When was the last time the council let you do something they did not control? She thought about it. She did not have an answer. He nodded once. Slow. Don't drink it. It is required. Don't drink it. She looked at him. For the first time that week, the empress slipped off her face for one full second, and there was just a woman there, 28 years old, very tired, looking at the only person who had ever told her not to do something the council required. She said, "I will not drink it." He said, "Good." The morning of the sacrament came pale and very cold. The Grand Hall of Aurelia Prime had been built 9,000 years ago on the night of the founding of the empire by an architect who believed light should be afraid of the empress. The hall was vast. The ceiling vanished into a darkness so deep you could not see the rafters. The walls were sheets of polished black stone that reflected the lamps as small distant stars. A long path of pale silver ran from the great doors to the dais, where the throne sat like a thing carved out of a single night. The nobility were assembled. They wore the silvers and dark blues of court dress. They held crystal flutes filled with pale nectar. They drank slow. They watched. Celira walked the silver path alone. Rowan walked 5 paces behind her. That was the protocol he had been allowed. 5 paces. Visible. A scandal. A break with every imperial precedent. There were small intakes of breath in the crowd as he passed. A whisper. Another whisper. A noble in deep green dropped her glass and pretended she had not. He did not look at any of them. He watched the dais. Theron Drax was already there. He stood beside the throne, robed in the High Counselor's deep gray. His face was a desert, long, lined, carved by the kind of patience that comes from waiting 30 years for something you intend to take. He held the council chalice. It was a wide, shallow cup of gold and platinum. Inside it was something pale that frothed faintly. Celira reached the foot of the dais. She did not kneel. The empress did not kneel. She bowed her head the standard angle 10 degrees, and Rowan watched the muscles of her neck stay tight all the way through it. Theron Drax raised the chalice. His voice carried. Old men's voices in the Arity tradition carried by design. The empress will now partake of the sacrament. The hall held its breath. Celira raised her gloved hands. She took the chalice. Her fingers closed around the rim. Rowan watched her fingertips. He watched them shake, just once, just barely. She lifted the cup. He stepped forward. Hold. His voice was not loud. He had spent 20 years learning that you do not need to be loud. You need to be cold, and you need to be on the right pitch, and you need to be the only thing speaking. The hall went still. Theron Drax turned. The old face did not register surprise. The old face registered something worse. Recognition. Like a man who had been waiting for exactly this. "The beast speaks," Theron Drax said. "My suit just spiked," Rowan said. He kept walking up the silver path. Compound consistent with hydrogen cyanide. Concentration lethal for Arity physiology. Source the chalice. You will be silent. My suit's not silent. He tapped the side of his helmet. He had unsealed the helmet the moment he walked into the hall. He had told the audio AI to broadcast on the external channel the moment a flag tripped. He had told it to broadcast in the council's own ceremonial cadence, slow and clean, the way a vote was read out in the upper chamber. The voice of his suit AI rolled across the grand hall like a verdict. Analyzing chalice contents. Detected. Hydrogen cyanide concentrated. Lethality assessment. Irity physiology 100%. Lethality assessment. Terran physiology 41%. The hall did not move. The hall did not breathe. Salira's hand holding the cup did not move either. But her eyes lifted to Theron Drax's face, and the old man's desert cracked. "Lies," he said. The voice was thinner than it had been. "Foreign instruments. The compact does not recognize alien machines." "It's not a machine," Rowan said. "It's a smell." He crossed the last steps. He stopped at the Empress's elbow. He held out his hand. She placed the chalice in his palm. He held it up to the hall. He poured. The pale liquid splashed across the silver path. It hissed where it hit the stone. It ate into the polished surface. It left a long, pale scar in the metal that would not be polished out for 2 centuries. The nobility made a sound. It was not a scream. It was a deeper sound. The sound of 1,000 people all at once understanding the same thing. The Empress had been ordered to drink poison by the man who had raised her, in front of all of them. Salira turned to face Theron Drax. She did not raise her voice. "You tried to kill me. For the good of the state. For the good of the state. You have become unstable. You allowed an alien to touch you. You are corrupted. The compact must be renewed by other means. By killing me. By a new Empress. The line will continue. The line is not you." She did not flinch. She tilted her head very slightly, the way a woman tilts her head when she has just heard for the first time a sound she has been listening for all her life. "Theron." The old man went rigid. She had used the diminutive, the child's name for him, the name she had used when she was 4, and he had been her uncle and her tutor, and the man who carried her on his shoulders down the long halls of the Summer Palace. She had not used the name in 19 years. She used it now. "Did you kill my mother?" The hall stopped. Theron Drax did not answer. He did not have to. The silence was the answer. Salira did not weep. Salira had wept in the medical bay. Salira had wept in the dark of her own bedchamber. Salira did not weep now. She turned to Rowan. "Shadow. Yes. Run a scan. On the cups he. On me." He did not ask twice. He pulled the data pad from his hip. He pointed the sensor array at her. He did not have to tell it what to look for. The pad already knew. The pad had been quietly scanning her every time she had taken his hand for the past 7 days. He had been waiting for a moment to use what it had found. The pad pulsed once. Then it pulsed again. The AI voice carried across the grand hall. "Subject, Irity female. Anomaly detected. Subdermal nanite mesh woven through the upper epidermis. Density, saturation. Estimated mass 4.2 grams. Origin, Irity manufacture. Control signal. External source. The council spire." The hall made the sound again. Deeper. "Nanites," Rowan said. He did not look up from the pad. He read what scrolled across it. He let his voice be flat. "The bioelectric discharge is not native to her physiology. The discharge is generated by a manufactured mesh woven into her skin. The mesh is controlled by a signal originating from the council spire. Switch off the signal. Switch off the field." Salira did not move. A thing was happening inside her that nobody in that hall could see. 21 years of cold winters in a freezing bedchamber. 21 years of pulling her hands out of reach. 21 years of a nursemaid whose name she did not know, whom she had been told she had killed at the age of 7. 21 years of believing she was a monster. And all of it had been a switch on a console in a tower across the city. She turned her hand over in front of her face. She said very quietly, "It was a setting." Rowan did not answer. "It was a setting on a dial." He still did not answer. There was nothing to say. She looked up. She looked at Theron Drax. The Empress was gone from her face. The sacrament was gone. The protocol was gone. There was only a 28-year-old woman who had just been told that everything she had been told about herself was a lie, including the part where she had to be alone. She raised her hand. The markings on her temples flared. They flared too bright, too fast. The dial had been turned by somebody who had panicked. The mesh under her skin was reacting to her cortisol. It was reacting to her grief. It was overloading. She knew it was overloading. Theron Drax knew it too. "Restrain her," he shouted. His voice cracked. "She is in surge. She will burn the hall." The hall guard hesitated. The hall guard had spent their entire careers being told that the Empress was a divine weapon. The hall guard had also just heard very clearly that the Empress was a girl with a mechanical implant. The hall guard did not know who to obey. A captain stepped forward. His name was Kalen. Rowan had drunk weak Irity beer with him twice. He was young. He had a small daughter at home. He had been raised on the old stories about the Empress, and he had also been raised by a mother who had taught him to listen. Kalen drew his blade. He did not raise it at Salira. He raised it at Theron Drax. "By order of the Empress's shadow," Kalen said. The voice was even. The hand was not steady. The hand was steady enough. "The High Counselor is detained on suspicion of treason and attempted regicide." The hall guards slowed, then suddenly all at once raised their weapons, half pointed at the council, half pointed at the floor. Nobody pointed at the Empress. The thing on Salira's skin did not care. It was overloading. Sparks lifted from her shoulders. The silk of her gown began to scorch small black holes flowering in the silver fabric. She gasped. She staggered. "Get away," she sobbed at Rowan. "It is surging. I cannot." Rowan did not get away. He did not even pretend to. He slung his rifle. He dropped his datapad. He walked across the dais like a man crossing a kitchen floor, like the lightning rising off her shoulders was a leaking faucet he had decided to come back and fix later. He stopped in front of her. "Salira." "No." "Salira." "Rowan, no. It is not the same as before. The dial is turned up. The dial is past the line. Please, please, you must." "Hush." He grabbed her. He did not hold her hand this time. He pulled her in. He wrapped both arms around her waist. He pressed her face into the crook of his neck where the armored collar ended and the bare skin began. He buried her there. He shielded as much of her surface area with his own body as a man could shield. The pain was as advertised, not the same as before. Before had been a wire. This was a furnace. The mesh was dumping every joule it had been told to dump. It was searching frantic for the synaptic chain that would shut him off. It was failing. It was failing again. It was failing every 2 milliseconds and dumping more power into the failure each time because the mesh had been built to overpower any nervous system that resisted it, and Rowan's nervous system did not resist. It just did not understand the signal at all. It registered the signal as heat. It tried to dissipate the damage. It dissipated through the densest tissue available, which was him. His vision went to static. His jaw locked. He bit the inside of his cheek so hard he tasted iron. His knees nearly went. He kept them. He pressed his mouth against her ear. "Ground it," he rasped. "Through me. Give it to me." She was sobbing. She had her fingers fisted in the back of his armor. She was sobbing not because of the pain. She was sobbing because somebody was holding her while she was overloading, and nobody had ever done that. And she was 28 years old, and she had not understood until that exact second what the word held meant. The mesh peaked, the mesh finding no shutdown to lock onto, sensing the Empress's cortisol slowly drop, sensing his heat absorbing what it dumped, did what overloaded systems eventually do. It cycled down. The white light at her temples faded to a slow, soft magenta. The sparks on her shoulders stuttered out. The scorched silk smoked. Rowan stayed standing. His arms shook. He did not let go. "Got you," he whispered. Got you. Rowan. Yeah? I cannot feel the mesh anymore. It's not gone. It's idle. The signal is coming from across the city. We have to leave. Where? He looked over her shoulder. He looked at the assembled nobility, all of them on their feet, none of them sure who they were anymore. He looked at Theron Drax. The old man was being held by two of Kaelin's guards. His face had gone the color of old wax. He was looking at Salira the way a man looks at a fire he had built and lost control of. Rowan looked back down at the Empress. You said you do not remember your mother's face. She did not breathe. There has to be someone, he said. 21 years ago, somebody held you, somebody hummed to you, somebody was there before he was. She thought hard. The Empress did not have many private memories. The Empress had been managed. But there had been, a name, half a name, a sound she had not been allowed to keep. Maella, she whispered. Her name was Maella. She lived in the lower wing. They sent her away. After. I was told she had refused to attend the ceremony of my majority. I was told she had been ungrateful. Where did they send her? I do not know. He thought. I do. She looked at him. There is one village outside the city that takes the palace exiles. Veshin Hollow. The barracks gossip about it. The Iridae who get sent there do not come back. The ones who try are stopped at the gate and turned around. Veshin Hollow. Yes. She nodded. The Empress assembled herself slow around the woman she had been the moment before. She turned to Captain Kaelin. Her voice carried. The High Counselor will be held in his own chambers under guard. No communication, no staff, nothing in or out. The Council spire is sealed. No signal will leave it until the source of the broadcast is identified and severed. Yes, Empress. And Kaelin. Empress. You are kind. I remember. Your mother was kind. Tell her I said so. The young captain's eyes went bright. He bowed. He did not trust his voice. She turned to Rowan. Take me to Veshin Hollow. Now. Now. They went out through the kitchens. The kitchens were the part of the palace the council had forgotten existed. The kitchens were staffed by Iridae, who had been raised by Iridae, who had been raised by Iridae, who had washed dishes for 30 generations, and they did not bow to counselors. They bowed to whoever signed the grocery orders. Salira signed the grocery orders. A round-faced woman named Threvit, who ran the morning bread, looked at Rowan, looked at the Empress in a scorched gown, looked at the side door that led to the deliveries dock and said, Take the green van. The blue one is being repaired. The green one is full of grain. Threvit. Yes, Empress. Thank you. Threvit's mother thanks you back. Go. They went. The green van was very old. It rattled. The grain in the back hissed at every pothole. Rowan drove. He kept off the main routes. He kept off the roads the council drones would be patrolling. He kept the lights low. Salira sat in the passenger seat. She had pulled a kitchen worker's cloak around her shoulders. She had pulled the hood low. She looked in the dim cab of an old delivery truck, like any one of 1,000 Iridae women heading out of the city after a long shift. She did not speak for the first hour. Then she said, Maella. He glanced over. She used to braid my hair, Salira said. I do remember that. I had forgotten. She used to braid my hair. She used to say a girl with a braid was a girl who could go anywhere. Good. I had forgotten. I know. There is so much I have been allowed to forget. He did not answer. He drove. The city lights thinned. The road climbed. The pale moons came up over the eastern hills, one after the other like two slow eyes opening. Veshin Hollow was not on any map he could call up on the van's navigator. He had to ask twice at two roadside stalls, both run by elderly Irity women who took one look at the Empress in the cab and pretended they had not. The second one drew a map on the back of a receipt. She did not say a word. She just patted Salira's hand through the window. Salira stared at her own hand for a long time after the stall fell behind. She touched me. Yeah. She knew who I was. She touched me. Yeah. She was not afraid. Salira. Yes. None of them were ever supposed to be afraid. She put her face in her hands. She did not cry. He drove. Veshin Hollow was a cluster of low stone houses on a hill that overlooked a small black lake. There were no street lamps. The houses had lanterns hung by their doors. The lanterns burned a pale yellow oil that smelled like old tea. The third house from the road had a wind chime hanging from the eave. The wind chime was made of small, thin shells. The shells caught the moonlight. Salira walked up the path alone. Rowan stayed at the van. The rifle stayed in his hands. He watched the road. She knocked. The door opened. An old Irity woman stood inside the doorway. 68, give or take. Her sapphire skin had gone the color of pale slate at the temples, the way Irity's skin did with age. Her hair was the deep blue-gray of a winter sea. She was small. She was wearing an apron. She had flour on her hands. She looked at the woman on her step. She looked at the face, she looked at the eyes, she looked at the shape of the jaw, which was the shape of a face she had known when it was small enough to fit in her two hands. Maella Oren dropped the bowl she was holding. It shattered on the floor. "Oh," she said. "Oh, child." Salira did not move. She had not been spoken to in that tone in 21 years. She did not know what to do with her hands. Maella did. Maella came forward. The flour on her palms was still wet from the dough. She did not care. She reached up. She took Salira's face in her two hands. A tiny spark snapped between them, the residual ghost of a mesh that was no longer being signaled. Maella did not flinch. Maella said, "Hush." Salira began to shake. Not from cold, not from fear. From a thing she did not have a word for because the thing had been forbidden to her for so long that her body had forgotten the name of it. Maella pulled her down. The old woman was small. The Empress was tall. Maella pulled her down anyway, like a mother pulls a child down to her level. Salira bent. She bent until her forehead rested against Maella's gray temple. Maella's arms came around her shoulders. Maella's flour-dusted hands closed against the back of her neck. Maella held her. For the first time in 21 years, somebody held Salira Vale. She made a sound. It was not a word. It was not a sob. It was something older than either the sound a body makes when it remembers something it has been holding for 2 decades. "Hush," Maella said. "Hush, hush. There you are. There you are, my darling. There you are." Rowan watched from the road. He watched the old woman fold the Empress of Aurelia Prime into her doorway. He watched the door close behind them. He watched the lantern by the eave swing in a small wind. He turned away. He gave them this. He walked a slow perimeter of the small lake and the small hill, and he did not come back to the house for a full hour. When he did come back, the kitchen smelled like dark tea and crushed mint. Maella had set out 3 small cups. Salira was sitting at the table. Her face was wet. Her hood was down. Her gloves were off. Her braid had come half undone, and Maella had set her hands to the work of redoing it, the long blue rope of hair sliding patient through old fingers. Maella did not stop working when Rowan came in. She looked up at him over Salira's head. She was small. She was 68 years old. She was holding the Empress in place with 2 hands and a braid and the steady weight of her presence. She looked Rowan square in the eye. "You are the one who held her." "Yes, ma'am." "In the garden." "Yes." "And in the hall." "Yes." Maella nodded once. "Good," she said, that was all. She finished the braid. She tied the end with a thin scrap of red ribbon she had pulled from her apron pocket. She turned Salira by the shoulders. She said, "Drink your tea, my child." Salira drank. The Empress had been drinking tea since she was 4. The Empress had taken tea in front of 3,000 ambassadors and never spilled a drop. The Empress's hands shook so hard on this cup that Mayella had to steady the rim with her thumb. Mayella did. Mayella did not comment. When the cup was empty, Mayella stood. She walked to the corner of the kitchen. She bent down. She lifted a loose floorboard. She brought out a small wooden box. She set it on the table in front of Salira. "This is your mother's," she said. "Empress Aelira gave it to me the week before. She told me if anything ever happens, you give it to my girl when she is old enough to read it, when she is in the room with someone who would not let her be alone for it." Myella's eyes went briefly to Rowan. She nodded once. "You are not alone for it. Open it." Salira opened the box. Inside the box was a journal. It was bound in dark blue leather. The cover was embossed with the imperial seal. The pages had gone the cream color of old paper. There was a faint smell of crushed mint coming off the pages. The same crushed mint smell Salira had carried as her only memory of her mother for 21 years. She made a small sound. She opened the journal. She read. The handwriting was strong. It sloped to the right. It was the handwriting of a woman who had been taught to write before she had been taught to be polite. Salira read in silence for a long time. Then she stopped on one page. She read it once. She read it twice. She lifted her head. She looked at Mayella. Mayella. I know. Mayella. She writes here. She writes here that Theron. I know. He asked her to marry him. Before my father, he asked her. She said no. She loved a kitchen master, your mother, a man with steam-burned hands, your father. Mayella smiled a small old smile. Theron Drax never forgave it. He hid it well. He hid it from your mother. He hid it from your father. He did not hide it from those of us who work the lower wing. We saw him watching her. Salira turned the page. She read again. She writes that she was afraid of him. Yes. She writes that she was afraid that one day if he had the chance he would do something terrible to her child. Yes. To me. Yes, my darling. To you. Salira closed the journal. She did not close it gently. She closed it the way you close a door behind you when you have understood finally that you cannot go back. He did not curse me, she said. Know my heart. He poisoned me. He poisoned me at 7 years old. He told me I had killed you. Yes. He had not even killed you. He had only sent you here where I could not look for you. Yes. My mother. Your mother did not die of a fever. He poisoned her too. Yes, my heart. I believe so. I have believed so for 21 years. Salira stared at the closed journal. She placed her hand flat on the cover. She said quietly, I have spent 21 years apologizing to a corpse. You have spent 21 years apologizing for being born. The two women looked at each other across the small wooden table. The light from the lantern by the door fell across Mayella's gray temple and Salira's dark sapphire jaw, and the two faces were not in that moment the face of an empress and the face of a nursemaid. They were the face of a child who had finally come home and the face of the woman who had been keeping the door open. Rowan did not speak. He had not spoken for a long time. He stood by the window with his rifle held low against his thigh, and he watched the road. That was how he saw them coming. The headlights came over the rise of the eastern hill at the wrong speed for any local vehicle. They were running too fast. They were running too close together. They were running in a wedge. He moved. Mayella. Yes. Back door. She did not ask. She stood. She moved. She caught Salira by the elbow. She pulled her up out of the chair. Salira was holding the journal against her chest. She was not putting it down. Mayella, Rowan said. How many out the back? None. The lake is the back. Boat. There is one. It will hold two, not three. He nodded. He moved to the door. He braced. Salira. Yes. You and Mayella. The boat. Across the lake. There is a tree line. There is a road past the tree line. You walk south. You walk until you find a smaller village. You wait for me. Rowan. There is no time. Rowan. Salira. Take the journal. Take Mayella. Go. She looked at him. She looked at him for one whole second, the way you look at someone you are trying to memorize. Then she did what he told her. She went. Mayella went with her. Rowan turned to face the door. The headlights had stopped at the foot of the path. The vehicles were heavy, dark gray, council livery. The men coming out of them were not police. They were council enforcement. They wore deep gray armor. They carried plasma rifles. They moved like men who had been told they had permission. Theron Drax was not with them. Theron Drax did not need to be with them. Theron Drax was still under house arrest. He had been under house arrest for less than 4 hours. He had used the 4 hours. The lead enforcer crossed the front step. He looked at Rowan. He smiled. Step aside, mercenary. No, this is a council matter. This is a kitchen. Final warning. Yeah. The enforcer raised his rifle. Rowan shot him in the throat. The enforcer dropped. The next two came through the door. He killed the first one in the doorway. He killed the second one in the entry. He killed the third one across the threshold of the kitchen because the third one had a cleaner line of sight and Rowan was not going to let him take it. The fourth one came through the side window. The fourth one was smart. The fourth one did not aim at Rowan. The fourth one aimed past Rowan through the kitchen, through the open back door at the small wooden dock where Mayella was helping Salira into the boat. The shot punched out of the rifle. Mayella turned slow. Mayella had been a woman who had spent 21 years preparing every night before sleep for the possibility that someday someone would come for her empress. Mayella stepped sideways. She stepped between Salira and the line of the shot. The plasma round took her in the chest. It was clean. It was very fast. Mayella's body lit briefly from inside, with the soft white of plasma cooling through bone. Then she fell. She fell into Salira's arms. Salira caught her. The boat rocked. The lantern on the eave swung. The shells of the wind chime made one small surprise sound and went still. Rowan killed the fourth enforcer. Then he killed the silence in the room. He moved. He cleared the doorway. He cleared the porch. He cleared the path. There were no more. He ran to the dock. Salira was on her knees. Mayella was in her lap. Mayella's eyes were open. They were already going far. The old woman lifted one trembling hand. Salira was crying without sound. Salira took the hand. There was no spark. The mesh without its signal, without the council's broadcast, had gone silent in her skin. It had been silent since the kitchens. Her bare hand closed around Mayella's bare hand, and there was only warmth. Old paper-thin warmth, the warmth of an old woman's palm. Mayella. I know. Mayella, please. My heart. You cannot. Please, I just found you. I know, my darling. I know. The old woman's gaze fixed on her face. She did not look afraid. She looked for one whole second, almost amused the way old women in kitchens look amused when they have just remembered something nobody else in the room has remembered yet. Salira. Yes? You are not poison. Mayella. You are not poison, my child. You have never been poison. They told you a story. The story was wrong. Mayella. Your mother used to hold you. Your mother used to hold you just like this. Yes. Like this. Yes, Mayella. Yes. Mayella's hand tightened once on hers, then it loosened. The old woman went still. The lake was very quiet. Across the water, the pale moons made a long, bright road on the black surface. The wind chime on the eave moved faintly in a breath of air that did not seem to belong to anyone. Rowan stepped onto the dock. He did not speak. He knelt down behind Salira. He put one hand on her shoulder. The other he laid slow on the back of Maella's small gray head. He closed her eyes for her with 2 fingers. He had done this before. He had done it too many times before. He hated that he was good at it. Salira. Yes. We have to go. I know. There are more coming. He will not stop. I know. Salira. Rowan. She looked up at him. Her cheek was wet. Her hands were wet. Her cloak was wet. Maella's blood had soaked through the apron, through the silk into her palms. She did not wipe it off. She would not wipe it off for a long time. She let him lift Maella. He carried the small body up the dock. He laid her in the kitchen on the long wooden table where the bread had been rising. He folded her hands across her chest. He put the small wooden box back in her palms because that was where it had been waiting for 21 years, and she had earned the right to be the one who had kept it. Then he came back to the dock. He pulled Salira to her feet. She held the journal against her chest with both hands. The blood on her palms had soaked into the blue leather cover. She would keep that mark on it for the rest of her life. They stepped into the boat. He pushed off from the dock. He rowed. The water was very black. The 2 pale moons moved on the surface in a long, slow line. The lantern by the eave of Maella's small house grew smaller behind them, and then smaller, and then it was just one yellow star at the edge of a country they were leaving. Salira did not look back. She looked at her own hands one last time. She turned them over in the moonlight. She said very quietly, "It was never me." He kept rowing. "It was never me, Rowan. No, it was never me. No, Salira, it was never you." The boat slid into the dark of the far shore. The tree line of Umbra wood waited for them. The trees were tall and black and full of a wind that had not been in the city for 200 years. The road past the tree line led south into the kind of country a man and a woman could disappear into if they walked through the night, and if the night was kind, and if the woman could keep walking. The woman could keep walking. She had her mother's journal pressed against her chest. She had Maella's blood on her hands. She had behind her 21 years she would not be returning to. She stepped out of the boat. The first step she took on the far shore, she took barefoot. She had left her shoes on Maella's kitchen floor. She walked into the trees with her hand in Rowan's and her bare feet on the cold ground, and a small wind moved through the dark above them like a held breath finally let out. Behind them on the small black lake, the wind chime on Maella's eave rang once very soft. Then it was quiet. Part 3. The forest swallowed them. Umberwood was older than the Empire, older than the Council, older than the road that ran past it. The trees were tall and black, and they stood close together, and they made a sound when the wind moved through them that was not quite the sound of wind. Rowan walked first. He kept the rifle low. He kept his head up. He kept his ears tuned for the small clicks of council drones. He heard none. Salira walked behind him. She walked barefoot. He had offered her his boots. He had taken them off. He had set them on the ground in front of her on the cold moss like a man making an offering. She had looked at the boots. She had looked at him. She had shaken her head once. She had said, "I want to feel the ground." He had understood. He had put his boots back on. He had taken her hand. They walked. The cold came up through her bare feet. The cold went into her bones. The Iridai body was not built for cold. The Iridai body had been built for the warm reefs of an inland sea 10,000 years before the cities, and the inland sea had been gone for 9,000 of those years. And the Iridai body had never forgotten that it was supposed to be warm. She did not say she was cold. He knew anyway. He felt it in her hand. Her fingers had gone slack. Her pulse when he turned her wrist over in the dim moonlight was too slow. He stopped. He looked at the forest around him. He had spent 4 years on 3 different jungle worlds. He knew the shape of a defensible position. He saw one to his left, a low rise, a wall of black root, a small hollow under the root where the forest floor had washed out. He took her there. He set her down inside the hollow. He pulled the grain truck cloak around her shoulders. He moved fast. He gathered dry fungus from the underside of fallen logs. He gathered small twigs. He gathered the long, dry shed bark of a tree the Irity called whisper pine. He built a fire the way the drop shock manuals taught you to build a fire when you did not want anyone to see it. Low, smokeless, steady. He struck the flare. The fire caught. He fed it slow. He cupped his hands around it and breathed across the small blue flame and watched it find its legs. He looked at Celira. She was sitting with her back against the root wall. The journal was in her lap. Her hands were on the cover. Her hands had gone the color of pale slate, the color of the dead. He moved to her. Celira, I am cold. I know. I cannot, my fingers, I cannot feel my fingers. I know. Rowan. Yes. Hold me. He did not answer with words. He stripped his outer armor first. He set the plates beside the fire. He took off the heavy tactical vest. He left the trousers on. He kept the boots on. He kept his sidearm within reach. He stripped his undershirt. His chest was a map of an old career. Old scars. New scars. A starburst of pink at the side of his neck from a plasma graze on a world he no longer named. A long pale line down his sternum from a knife he had not seen coming on a contract he had not finished. He did not look at the scars. He pulled her toward him. He sat her between his knees. He wrapped the cloak around them both. He pulled her back against his bare chest. He pulled her in until her head was tucked under his chin. The mesh under her skin did not flare. The mesh was idle. Without the council signal, the mesh was a piece of cold jewelry threaded through her epidermis. It registered the heat of his body against hers. It tried half-heartedly to discharge. It managed only a small ghost of a spark at her left shoulder, a static pop barely audible. It was nothing. He held her tighter. She had not been touched skin to skin by anyone alive in 21 years. She made a sound. It was a small sound, smaller than the wind in the trees above them. It was the sound a woman makes when she has been carrying something for so long that she has forgotten how much it weighed, and then somebody takes one end of it. He did not say anything. He just held her. She let him hold her. The fire crackled. The wood smelled like crushed mint and old smoke. The journal sat on her lap, the blue leather marked with Maella's blood. The cold in her hands began slowly to go. She said, "Tell me something." He thought about it. What kind of something? Something that is not this place. He thought again. He looked at the fire. He said, "Her name is Junie." She did not move. She listened. "My daughter, she is 12. She lives on Earth, a small green planet. Her mother lives with her. Her mother and I were married for 9 years. We are not married anymore." Why? Because I was bad at the kitchen table. What does that mean? He thought about how to say it. I was bad at sitting still. I was good at leaving. There is a difference. When I came home after the last war, I could not. I could not sit. I could not be in a room with a small child and let the small child climb on my lap, because every time she climbed on my lap, I would forget where I was and I would push her off. You pushed her off. Not hard, Rowan. Not hard, but the kind of pushing off a child remembers. Yes, so I left. I told myself I was leaving for her. I was not. I was leaving for me. You were leaving because it was easier. Yes. Yes. He swallowed. I have a photograph at the bottom of my pack. She is 8 years old in the photograph. I have not looked at the photograph in 4 years. I came here because I did not want to look at it. I came here because if I could not be in a room with my own child, at least I could be in a place where there were no children. No kitchen tables, no small voices asking me to stay. She turned her head against his collarbone. She looked up at him. And then there was me, she said. And then there was you. You found a small voice asking you to stay anyway. Yes, yes. She lifted her hand. She put her palm flat against his chest over his heart. There was no spark, only the heat of him, which to her was a new country, and the slow beat of him, which to her was a clock she had never been given. She said, "Tell me about your mother." It took him a second. Mine. Yours. She baked bread. Bread. Every day of my life until I was 18. Every morning. I would come down the stairs and the kitchen would smell like yeast and the back of her neck would smell like flour. Maella had flour on her hands. I know. Maella had flour on her hands when she opened the door. Yeah. Celira closed her eyes. A long line of pale blue light slid down her cheek and across his thumb. The irity tear. It glowed. It was warm. She said, I never asked her name. You knew her name. I never said her name. Out loud, I never said, Maella, I called her May. When I was little, I called her May. I had forgotten. And tonight in her kitchen, I called her Maella. I called her by her grown name, like a stranger. I did not call her May. Celira. I should have called her May. She knew. You do not know that. I do. How do you know? Because she held you like a child. She did not hold you like an empress. She held you like a child. She knew the child's name for her. She knew. She did not speak for a long time. She just breathed against his chest. Then she said very quiet, My mother used to hum to me. Yeah, she used to hum in the morning. I think it was the old Imperial Cradle song. Maella hummed the same one, earlier, while she braided my hair. I did not realize until just now. She hummed the same song. She remembered the song my mother used to hum to me. He kissed the top of her head. He did it before he thought about doing it. He waited half a heartbeat for her to stiffen. She did not stiffen. She turned. She pressed her cheek against his chest. She closed her eyes again. The fire moved in the small hollow under the black root. The wind moved in the high trees above them. The journal on her lap rose and fell with her breath. She fell asleep with her hand over his heart. He did not sleep. He watched the fire. He thought about a kitchen on earth with a yeast-warm smell. He thought about a small girl on his shoulders 13 years ago with her hands in his hair. He thought about a photograph at the bottom of a pack 3 days' march from here, in a barracks he was never going back to. He thought, when this is over, I am writing to her. He thought, when this is over, I am opening the photograph. He thought, when this is over, I am going to find a kitchen table somewhere, and I am going to learn how to sit at it. He held the Empress of the Irity against his bare chest, and he watched the fire, and he made a promise to himself that he had not been able to make in 4 years. The forest kept its silence around them. Dawn came thin and gray. He felt it before he saw it. The temperature shift in the air, the first small calls of forest birds that were not quite birds. He moved her gentle off his chest. He pulled on his undershirt, his tactical vest, the plates. He buckled fast. She was waking. Rowan, time to move. Already, already. She nodded. She moved like a woman who had slept 4 hours after a year of insomnia. Half her body did not want to obey her. The other half remembered suddenly why it had to. She picked up the journal. She slid it inside her cloak. She stood. He kicked dirt over the fire. They left the hollow. They had walked perhaps 300 meters into the gray dawn when he heard it. It was a low thrum at the edge of audible, a sub-frequency, the sound your gut registered before your ears did. He stopped. He listened. He swore very quietly in a language he had not used since the last war. Celira. Yes, behind that ridge. She moved, he moved with her. He pressed her down behind the rise. He went flat beside her on his elbows. He raised the small monocular from his belt. He looked. The walker came over the far ridge slow. It was a quad. Iridy Council issue. Sleek black plating. 6 meters at the shoulder. The legs moved like the legs of a stilt bird, deliberate and patient. On its dorsal mount, it carried a wide, flat dish that he did not recognize from any spec sheet he had ever read. He recognized it anyway. He had read the council briefing on it once 2 weeks before. He had not been supposed to read the briefing. He had read it anyway. It was a resonance emitter. The briefing had described it as a precision instrument for stabilizing planetary defense grids. The briefing had been a lie. He lowered the monocular. Celira. Yes. The dish. I see it. It is not a weapon for me. It is a weapon for you. She went still. What does it do? It broadcasts at the resonant frequency of the nanites in your skin. It does not need a control signal. It just shakes them until they vibrate. They vibrate fast. They get hot. They boil. The thing in your skin cooks you from the inside out. She did not breathe. How long does it take? Less than a minute. At what range? 500 meters. We are inside the range. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She said, then I will surrender. No. Rowan. No. He will not stop. He will hunt us. He will hunt this forest. He will burn this forest. If I surrender, he stops. He uses me to lock down the council. He has what he wanted. He has me. He stops. He stops killing other people. He does not stop killing you. I know. I am not letting that happen. Rowan, I am not letting that happen. She looked at him. She looked at him for 1 full second. She memorized his face. She did it the way she had memorized it on the dock with Mayella in her lap. She said, what are you going to do? He said something stupid. He kissed her. It was the only second they had. He kissed her on the mouth. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman when there is possibly no second chance. Short, hard, real. There was a small static spark at the corner of her lip. He did not feel it. He felt only her. She kissed him back. She made a small sound against his mouth. He pulled away. He set his forehead against hers. 1 breath. Celira. Yes. When this is done, I want a kitchen table. What? I want a kitchen table. With you. I want to sit at one. With you. That is what I want. Yes. Promise. Yes, I promise. Rowan, do not. He was already moving. He stood. He pulled the rifle. He ran along the line of the ridge low. He vanished into the gray light between 2 black trunks. The walker turned its dish. The dish began to spin. Rowan came out of the trees 15 meters from the walker's right rear leg. He did not slow. He hit the leg at a full sprint. The magnetic clamps in his boots engaged with the chassis. The clamps had been designed for boarding actions in 0G. They worked just as well in 3/4 gravity if you came in with enough speed. He stuck. He went up the leg like a man going up a ladder. The pilot above him registered him too late. The walker's auxiliary turret swung. The turret could not depress far enough to track him. He was too close. He was inside the angle. He was already past the knee joint. He reached the hull plating. The dish was glowing white at the rim now. The wine was rising in pitch. He had perhaps 4 seconds. He did not have time for a clean job. He did not need a clean job. He ripped the maintenance panel off the side of the resonance emitter. He had taken off 3 of these panels in barracks training. He knew exactly where the screws were. He knew exactly where the high-voltage conduction coils ran underneath. He pulled the panel. The coils were exposed. They were fat, they were copper. They were carrying the current that fed the emitter dish. They were insulated from the walker's hull. They were not insulated from him. He looked down the slope of the hull. He saw at the bottom of the ridge Salira rising to her feet. She had stood. She was watching him. He did not have time to tell her to get down. He did not have time to tell her anything. He grabbed the coils. He did not try to break them. He grabbed them with both hands, and he made himself the path of least resistance. The walker fired. The beam did not go to Salira. The beam, the entire focused output of the emitter, 10,000 volts of directed electromagnetic energy, took the easiest available conduit to ground. The walker was insulated from the soil by its rubberized leg pads. Rowan was not insulated from anything. The current went through him. It went through him fast. It came in at his hands, and it traveled along the dense water of his blood and the dense salt of his nerves, and it left his body at the magnetic boot clamps that were stuck to the hull, and it grounded out through the walker's chassis, and it fried the walker's internal control computer, and it killed the council's local relay for the nanite signal in a wave of feedback that traveled all the way back across the city to the spire and shut every transmitter in the upper tower down for 16 minutes. The walker shuddered. The walker collapsed. Rowan slid off the hull. He hit the ground. He hit it like a dropped object. His armor smoked. His arms were black from the elbows down. The skin on his arms where the current had traveled had cooked into long branching fern-like white patterns. Lichtenberg figures, fractal lightning drawn into his flesh by his own electricity. His heart had stopped. The walker was dead. The forest was very quiet. Salira came down the ridge. She did not run. She walked. She walked the way a woman walks when she has in fact anticipated this. When she has known since the moment Rowan started running that this was what running meant. When her body has gone past panic into the cold, clean place beyond it. She knelt beside him. She put her hand on his chest. There was no heartbeat. She said, "Rowan." He did not answer. She said it again. "Rowan." He did not answer. She did not weep. Not yet. She put both hands on his chest. She tried to push the way she had seen field medics push in old training holograms. She pushed. His rib cage gave. She heard a small crack. She heard her own breath catch. She pushed again. She breathed into his mouth the way the holograms had shown. The breath went in. The breath did not come back. She pushed. The lightning scars on his arms steamed faintly in the cold air. "Rowan." She pushed. "Rowan, no." She pushed. "You said a kitchen table." She pushed. You said a kitchen table. You said you wanted one. With me. You promised." She stopped. She knelt over him with her hands flat on his blackened chest, and she looked at his face, and she remembered for the first time in 21 years the smell of crushed mint and the warm weight of a hand on her hair. She remembered her mother. She remembered her mother singing. She remembered Maella braiding her hair. She remembered Maella's two flour-dusted hands closing on the back of her neck. She remembered the way Maella had said, "There you are, my darling. There you are." She remembered in one cold, bright second every warm thing that had ever been done to her in her life. It was not a long list. It fit in the space between two breaths, but it was all of it real. It had not been done by a council. It had not been done by a high counselor. It had not been done by a machine in a tower. It had been done by women in kitchens and one man who had run full speed into a field that should have killed him. She raised her head. She looked at the magenta veins under her sapphire skin. They were quiet. They were idle. They were finally only her. She thought, "What am I?" She thought, "I do not know." She thought, "But my mother was not poison." She thought, "And I am my mother's daughter." She thought, and her hands were warm. A new light woke in her. It did not start at her temples. It started at her sternum. Deep, slow. The color was not magenta. The color was a soft, warm gold, like the gold of a lantern in an old kitchen at dawn. It moved up her chest. It moved down her arms. It pooled in her palms. It was the inheritance. It was the thing her mother's line had carried before the council, before the implants, before the lie. The old Iridy gift. The one that had been buried under a layer of nanites for 21 years. The one Miella had been trying to tell her about in that small kitchen when she had said, "You are not poison, my child." It was not a weapon. It had never been a weapon. She pressed her hands to his chest. The gold pulsed. It went into him. She closed her eyes. She said in the old imperial tongue the words from her mother's cradle song. She did not remember learning the words. The words came up from somewhere old in her body. She sang them very quiet against his face. The gold light traveled along the white Lichtenberg scars on his arms. It traveled up his chest. It traveled to the still place at the center of him. His heart moved. Once, then again. His ribs lifted under her hand. His lungs dragged in a slow, ragged breath. The kind of breath a body takes when it has decided against the advice of all its damaged systems to come back. His eyes opened. He looked up at her. His voice was wrecked. "Celira, yes. You said you would not let me die." "I did not say that." "You said it with your face." "Rowan." He took her hand. His was shaking. "Kitchen table." "Yes." "Promise." "Yes." She bent her head to his. She held him. She held him on the cold floor of umber wood with the dead walker beside them and the gold light fading slow from her palms. She wept. She wept for Miella. She wept for her mother. She wept for the 7-year-old girl who had been told she had killed her own nursemaid. She wept for the man under her hand who had survived because she had refused finally to believe a story she had been told her whole life. She wept for 1 whole minute. That was as long as she let herself. There was still work to do. Captain Kalin met them at the city gate. He had brought 2 transports and 12 loyal officers and a doctor. The doctor took one look at Rowan's arms and stopped speaking, and then he started speaking again very fast. In Iridy medical terminology, Rowan did not need to understand to know meant trouble. Celira rode in the transport with Rowan. She held his hand the whole way back. She did not let go for the medics. She did not let go for the gate guards. She did not let go for the steps of the palace. By the time they reached the medical wing, his color had come back. His pulse was unsteady. He was alive. She left him with the doctor. She walked alone down the long stone corridor to the council chamber. She still had Miella's blood on her hands. She had not washed it off. She had decided she would not. Not yet. The council chamber was full. Every counselor was there. Every high noble had been summoned. They had arrived in their court robes, their faces pale, their voices low. They had been told in the hours she had been in the forest what had happened at the sacrament. They had been told about the bioscan. They had been told about the nanite mesh. They had been told that the empress they had spent 21 years bowing to had been wearing a council leash they could not see. They were terrified. They were terrified of her. They were also, for the first time in any of their lives, terrified for her. Theron Drax was on the chamber floor. He had been brought from his quarters in chains. Real chains, not symbolic ones. Captain Kalin had taken no chances. Theron Drax stood in the center of the round floor. His gray robes wrinkled his face the color of paper. He looked at Celira when she came in. He did not look at her face. He looked at her hands. He looked at the blood. He recognized it. It was Miella's. He had given the order for the shot. He had known whose blood it would be. He did not speak. Celira walked to the center of the floor. She turned. She faced the high tier where the senior counselor sat. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The room was so quiet, you could hear the candles. She held up the journal. She said, "This is my mother's. This is the journal of Empress Elira Vale." Nobody moved. "It was given to me by the woman who raised me until I was 7. The woman who was sent away because she would not lie about how my mother died. The woman who was killed yesterday by men sent by Theron Drax. A counselor in the back row made a small sound. He covered his mouth with his hand. I am going to read from it. She opened the journal to the page Myella had folded down. She read. She did not perform. She did not make it dramatic. She read it the way her mother had written it, in a steady hand, on a quiet evening 21 years before her own murder. She read about the proposal. She read about the refusal. She read about the kitchen master her mother had loved and married. She read about the man she had not been able to love, who had not been able to forgive it, who had watched her year after year with a patience that had begun to frighten her. She read the line her mother had written about her child. I am afraid that if anything happens to me, he will turn his patience on her. I am afraid that he will not kill her. I am afraid that he will keep her. He will keep her near him. He will find a way to make her need him. He will tell her every day of her life that she cannot live without him. And she will believe him because she will be a child and I will not be there to say otherwise. Salira closed the journal. She looked at Theron Drax. He was on his knees. He had gone down sometime in the middle of the reading. Nobody had pushed him. His legs had given out. He was kneeling on the cold stone of the council floor, an old man in chains listening to the voice of the woman he had wanted after 30 years finally describing him. He was weeping. He was weeping silently, not in shame, in recognition. In the dull, terrible recognition of a man who had spent his whole life telling himself a story about himself, only to hear the story corrected from beyond a grave. He himself had filled in a voice he could not argue with. Salira did not pity him. She did not perform that either. She simply turned away from him. She walked. She walked along the curve of the chamber floor. She walked past the lower tier. She walked past the middle tier. She walked up the steps to the high tier. She stopped at the first counselor seat. She pulled off her right glove. She held out her bare hand. The counselor stared at her. He was old. He had been on the council for 41 years. He had watched her be brought into the chamber as a 4-year-old. He had watched her be lectured by Theron Drax. He had watched her be told again and again what she was. He looked at her bare blue hand. He raised his own. He touched her. There was no spark. There was no flare. There was only the warm, dry skin of an empress, 28 years old, who had been told all her life that her touch would kill him, and who had all his life believed it. He did not let go. He could not. He pressed her hand to his forehead. He bent over it. He wept too. He wept in the quiet way old men weep when they have just realized the thing they had been doing for 40 years was wrong. She moved on. She moved to the next counselor. The next counselor took her hand. She moved to the next. She moved along the high tier all the way around, and she touched every hand that was offered to her. Some were offered fast. Some were offered slow. Some had to be coaxed. One counselor, a woman of 70, sobbed so hard she could not lift her hand at all, and Salira simply bent and took it, and the woman's 2 hands closed over hers like a child closing both hands around a mug of hot tea. She did not say a word the entire time. She did not have to. The truth spoke for itself. When she had touched every counselor in the high tier, she walked back down to the floor. She stopped in front of Theron Drax. He looked up at her. He was still weeping. He was somewhere underneath the chains, and the wax-pale face still the man she had called Theron when she was 4 before he had become the man who killed her mother. She did not touch him. She did not have to. She said very quiet, "The council convenes the high tribunal. Charges are treason, regicide, conspiracy to commit regicide, and the unlawful implantation of an imperial subject. Sentencing will be public. Sentencing will not be by me. I will not carry the weight of his end. He is not worth it." The chamber moved. The chamber rose to its feet, all of it, every robe and every chair and every old face. The chamber bowed, not to the empress, to the woman. She walked out. She did not look back. She walked all the way down the long stone corridor to the medical wing, and she pushed open the door and Rowan was sitting up on the bio bed, eating a nutrient bar he had smuggled in the cuff of his boot, and she crossed the floor and took his face in both hands and kissed him on the mouth. He blinked. He said hi. She said hi. She said, I am tired. He said, yeah. She said, I want a kitchen table. He said, okay. 3 years passed. The cold open of this story showed you a body of water on a black beach and a woman in silver and a man with white scars. That was 3 years later. That was the Festival of Lights. That was the day she walked down the long marble steps of the palace and out on foot into a crowd of her own people for the first time in her adult life. The crowd parted for her, not in fear, in reverence. She wore no gloves. She wore a simple gown the color of a winter sky. Her hair was braided. The red ribbon at the end of the braid was the one Mayela had tied off in the small kitchen in Veshan Hollow. She had not replaced it. The ribbon had faded. She did not care. She walked among them. She paused at a group of elders by the central fountain. They were the same elders who 20 years ago had bowed to her as she passed at a distance of 10 meters. They bowed again now. She reached out. She took the nearest old man's hand. She held it. He did not flinch. He smiled. She smiled back. She moved on. She paused at a vendor selling spice cakes. She bought one. She paid. She pressed the coin into the vendor's hand, and the vendor stared at her palm and then at her face. And then she burst out laughing because the Empress had bought a cake, and that was a thing that had never happened before. And the vendor did not know what else to do with the joy of it but laugh. Salira laughed too. She ate the cake. It was sweet. Then a small child broke from the crowd. She was 7 years old. She had midnight blue hair, the color Salira's hair had been at 7. She had a torn sash. She had been running away from her mother the way 7-year-olds run away from mothers. She had seen the Empress. She did not know she was not supposed to run up to the Empress. Nobody had taught her yet, because nobody in the new Aurelia Prime had decided yet that you had to teach children to be afraid of an Empress. The child ran up to Salira. The child grabbed Salira's hand. The child looked up. Salira looked down. A small jolt of recognition went through her. The child was 7. Salira had been 7. The child's hand was small. Salira's hand at 7 had been that small. The child was looking up at her with absolute trust. Salira had looked up at her own mother with absolute trust. Salira knelt. She got down to the child's level. She did this slow. She did this on the cobblestones in her gown the color of a winter sky. She took the child's small face in her 2 hands. There was no spark, there was only warmth, old human warmth, sapphire skin and sapphire skin. She said, "What is your name?" The child said, Inara. Salira said, Inara. That is a beautiful name. Inara said, "You are pretty." Salira laughed. It was the second time she had laughed in public in her life. She was getting better at it. She said, "Thank you, so are you." The child grinned. The mother arrived breathless, apologizing. Salira stood. She put her hand on the mother's shoulder. She said, "Do not apologize. Ever. For her." The mother nodded. She could not speak. She gathered her child. She carried her back into the crowd. Inara waved over her mother's shoulder all the way. Salira watched her go. She turned. She walked up the long marble steps, slow toward the palace balcony. Rowan was there. He was leaning on the railing. He was wearing a loose tunic. He had given up on tight collars 3 years ago because the lightning scars on his neck and forearms made tight collars uncomfortable. The Lichtenberg figures had not faded. They were a permanent map of fractal white branches across his skin. He had stopped hiding them. He did not turn when she came up beside him. He was looking out at the city. She came to his shoulder. She rested her head against his arm. "You watched." "I watched." "You did not come down." "I wanted to. You were doing fine." "I was." A pause. He said, "I wrote to her last week, Junie. I sent the letter 3 days ago. A real letter with a pen. I told her I was sorry. I told her she did not have to write back. I told her I would write again next week, in the week after, in the week after that, until she told me to stop. Salira closed her eyes. She pressed her forehead into his shoulder. She said, Rowan, yeah, have you forgiven yourself? He thought about it. He thought about it for a long time. He said, when you touched me. She did not answer. She did not need to. She slid her hand into his. The two of them stood at the railing as the pale moons came up over the spires of Aurelia Prime, one after the other, like two slow eyes opening. Down below in the festival square, the lanterns lifted. They lifted by the 100. They lifted by the 1,000. They drifted up over the city, small yellow lights in a lavender sky, and each one was a wish, and each wish belonged to a person who had once been told by somebody in power that the Empress's touch would kill them. She had touched a child today. The child had laughed. That was the answer to 21 years of a lie. Rowan turned his head. He looked down at the woman beside him. He said, kitchen table. She said, yes. He said, I built it. She said, what? He said, I built it. The kitchen table. While you were doing council business this week, I did it in the lower workshop, the one nobody uses. I used the old wood from Veshin Hollow, the wood from her house, Maela's. She had a tree out back. They cut it. They gave me the wood. I built a table. It is small. It is good for two. It is good for three if one of them is small. Salira did not speak. She looked at him. She looked at his lightning-scarred forearms gripping the rail. She looked at the calloused fingers that had built a kitchen table out of the wood of an old woman's tree. She kissed him. It was a long kiss. There was no spark. There had not been a spark in 3 years. There was only warmth in the soft press of his mouth, in the slow heat of his hand against her jaw. When she pulled back, her cheeks were wet. She said very soft, show me. He took her hand. He led her down off the balcony, away from the city, away from the festival, away from the long, pale lights drifting up into the lavender sky. He led her through the quiet halls of the palace and down the small staircase to the lower workshop, and he opened the door. The table was small. It was made of dark, warm wood. It was sanded smooth. It had 2 chairs. There was a third small chair beside one of the big ones. He looked at her sideways when she saw it. He said, just in case. She put her hand over her mouth. She sat down at the table. He sat down across from her. The lights of the festival drifted past the small window of the lower workshop, far and small. She reached across the table. She put her hand on his. He turned his palm up. He laced his fingers through hers. She said, they said no man could survive my touch. He said, yeah. She said, you held me anyway. He said, yeah. She said, thank you. He said, Salira. She said, yes. He said, I am the one who should be thanking you. The lanterns drifted up over the city. Maela had not been forgotten. Her name was on the new statue in the square. The little girl named Inara would tell her own daughter one day about the time the Empress had knelt down on the cobblestones and taken her face in 2 bare hands. The kitchen master's daughter, 28 years old, slept that night for the first time in her life, with no chill in her bones and no fear in her hands. And in a small room with a kitchen table built out of a Veshin Hollow tree, a human man with white lightning scars and the Empress of Aurelia Prime sat across from each other in the quiet. And they ate bread together, and they did not say much. They did not need to. They had said the only thing that needed saying 21 years too late, and 3 years too late, and just exactly on time. They had said you are not alone. They had said it with their hands. They had said it with their faces. They had said it with the simple fact that they were sitting at a small kitchen table and neither one of them was getting up to leave. They said no man could survive her touch. He held her anyway. And she taught a whole galaxy that dignity is not a thing somebody gives you. It is the thing nobody has the right to take.